Okay, great to have everybody on today. Today is July 30th, 2023. And this is our monthly Afterlife 30th monthly Q&A, about any questions you have about the afterlife. It's open forum. There's no particular structure to this. You can ask whatever you want. This recording also will be on my YouTube channel, and there's a special playlist just for these sessions on my YouTube channel. So you can always find it there. If obviously all the people who have registered for this, you guys will get a direct link to the video later on today when I upload the recording of today's session. Okay. So again, for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Kelvin Chin, and I run this monthly open forum Q&A about anything related to the afterlife every month on the 30th of the month, except for February. But every month on the 30th of the month, so it's easy to remember, and it's always at the same time as it's at 12 Pacific time. I'm in Los Angeles, California, so it's 12 o'clock Pacific, and then you can figure out the time zones around the world accordingly. The special event, we could call it, for today is that we got George Hammond with us today. Now, let me just introduce George a little bit. So George is going to be answering most of your questions. I can pop in, and if you have a specific question for me, you should feel free to direct it directly to me. But otherwise, I've invited everybody to ask George questions specifically because this is the first time he's ever been here with us in this particular monthly series. So George and I go back 4,000 years. Let's just start there. So it's been
very quick. It's been very quick.
Yeah, it's been a quick 4,000, exactly. Yeah. So we go back 4,000 years. We met in ancient Egypt. So those of you who haven't read my first book, now you know. Or if you haven't seen any of the interviews and whatever on my
I'm
YouTube.
Sure I had to arrest you or something for something you were doing.
Yeah, exactly. Something nefarious, exactly. and then we've been together a number of times since then, including 2,000 years ago. We met at Dartmouth College. We both went to Dartmouth. George is much younger than I am. Anyway, so we met there, and we've taught meditation together, and we have a very, very close working and personal relationship, familial relationship, and so forth. I'm going to let you guys ask George most of the questions today, because, as I said, he hasn't been here with us before, and who knows, how often, if at all, in the future he'll come back. So that's
depends on how you treat me, Kelvin.
Exactly. Well, putting more of the burden on them to see how, to make sure that. But anyway, so but seriously, I'm going to kind of stay out of it for the most part today, so that you guys can ask George all the questions that you've been waiting to ask him, for those of you especially who've seen the 30th November talk that I helped organize in 2014, where George got a download from all the spiritual leaders of the Judeo-Christian Islamic Vedic traditions on the other side, and gave that talk. It's at 30thnovember.com if you haven't seen the talk yet. I know most of you have. And you're probably, been especially after seeing the talk, been itching to ask him personally some questions that came up for you. Unless he really butchers some old story about us from 4,000 years ago. From 4,000 years ago, I'm going to kind of keep to myself. All right, so let's open it up for questions. People who have questions, feel free. Go ahead, speak.
I can start with one that Jody
yeah, why don't you start
in advance. Jody asked a question which I think on a lot of people's minds because of this. And he asked, how can I increase the probability of my communication with the other side? So a lot of people who hear about communications with the other side, of course, that's your first question. Oh, that sounds fun, or it sounds interesting. And it is. But if the person on the other side doesn't have anything interesting to say, it's no more interesting than conversations in the airport with somebody who doesn't have anything interesting to say, or around you. Because I think one of the things that's important to understand, or at least to feel, is that we're sort of all in this together. We've all been in this together for a long time. And all the minds that you're used to seeing and the personalities that you're used to seeing here, they're exactly the same ones on the other side. I mean, very similar. Just like anything with any large group, there's not too many people who are outliers with their personalities. People don't like to go against the group. Everybody likes to kind of conform at least a little bit, so they're somewhat acceptable. And most of the people who are willing to communicate over the barrier are people who do not conform to what everybody thinks. And that doesn't mean that they're right. It just means they don't conform. And it can be a stupider idea than we're used to, and it can be a more intelligent idea that we're used to. And that's why I'm sure Kelvin's always talking about deciding for yourself what makes sense, what resonates with you. So I want to talk, before I talk about how to increase the probability of communicating with the other side, what that desire is. Is the desire to understand life better? Is the desire to communicate with the other side? I know when Maharishi came out with his TM City program, that you could do different, theoretically, you could do different skills. The Yoga Sutras talk about these skills too. And there was a TM teacher in Philadelphia, when he heard that you could fly, his image for himself was he wanted to be at a bar, and he wanted to, with a bunch of business people, and he wanted to float up in the air, float over to the bar, order his next drink, float back to where he was, and stand up again and keep talking. Now, obviously, it wasn't for the experience of floating over to the bar. He could have walked over. It was so that everybody would look at him and say, hey, look what that guy's doing. Amazing. And that's his desire, not to fly, but for everybody to say, hey, you're amazing. And you know where we get this from? We get this from when we're 2 years old. You know, you walk in the room and everybody says, wow, look, you're here. Wait, fantastic. And people feel that. Of course, once you have a little sister or a little brother or somebody else that's starting to take the attention, when you walk in the room, it doesn't happen anymore. And those who really, really miss that, they either go into politics or they go to Hollywood, you know, because you want to be able to walk in the room and everybody cheer. Yeah, he's here. And so this idea about wanting the attention and being the center of attention is a sort of fundamental way we look at life. And there's nothing really wrong with it, but is it accurate? We feel we're the center of the universe, right? And why do we feel that? Because all of our experiences are here, the universe is out here, and everything is coming into us. And I think that almost all the ideas that people have given to other people about the afterlife, about what goes on, about what the order of the universe is, about what the spiritual hierarchies are, all of those ideas were there to try to explain this concept. I'm the center of the universe, and in what way is that not true? So, you know, we'll abstract that for a while, but we'll go back to this concept, because if you want to communicate with the other side, in this case, Jody, what do you really want? What is your real desire? Of course, it is the desire to communicate with the other side, but what are your motives? And usually we have like 50 to 100 or 1,000 motives for everything that we do. And that's why there's no such thing as pure happiness most of the time, because some of our motives get fulfilled when we fulfill a desire and some don't. And so we fulfill part of our desire, we don't fulfill other ones. An example I often use for that is, you know, you watch a commercial on the Super Bowl for a Mercedes, and you say, yes, I want one of those. I want to be the man who protects his family in this really good car, and so on and so forth. And also, you know, usually the advertisements also show your neighbors all being jealous of you. So So you drive, you go home, you get the Mercedes, and you want it for all those things that you think, but you also want the neighbor to come, to say that. So you're driving your car home, and you see your neighbor washing his car in the driveway, and you roll down the window and you say, "Hey, how do you like my new car?" And he looks down and he says, "Oh my God, you got a Mercedes? Why didn't you get a BMW?" And he's washing his car, which is a BMW. So that takes a little bit of the pleasure out of what you went out to buy the car for. But it's only one of 10, 20, 30 motives. And so mostly you're still happy, but there's something that gnaws at you. Now, same thing is true about wanting to communicate with the other side. You can have all kinds of different motives for it. And we're all so different. Everybody has a different pattern of emotions and motives for that desire. But if the desire is simply to say, "I have been able to do it," that plays into the people on the other side who really want you to be so impressed that they've talked to you that either you do what they want to, or you run around and do what they say, so that they get people to behave for them. They can't do certain things. So there are some beings who really are entertained by that. There's a sort of Comic Con, attitude on the other side. If you can dress up like somebody or give the impression that you're somebody to a whole bunch of people, it's often done. And so a lot of the experiences that people have seeing somebody from the other side, it's never clear who they actually are. Kelvin, I'm sure, has talked a lot about NDEs. Almost everybody that has an NDE, there's a being of light that talks to them, or they communicate with them somehow. And that being of light is usually interpreted by the person who's experiencing it as whatever their religious beliefs are. Either it's Jesus, or it's Muhammad, or it's Buddha, or it's some angel that they know about, or maybe it's a saint if they're Catholic and they don't think that God would spend the time with them yet, but get him later, so that they, lower their expectations a little bit. All that is just our reaction to our experience. Now, how is what we experience, Kelvin and I experience, different than that? That's, pretty hard to say. It goes through our own filters too. But we have a lot of experience doing this, and we know the personalities on the other side that did it. And the personalities are recognizable to us. We don't just see them as a light being, we see them as that personality. And so that's why we're convinced of it. In addition, there's usually, in this case, there were a whole bunch of little things that were said and done that we only know along with that person on the other side. Something we did with Maharishi, something we did with Jesus. And so usually, if you've seen Harry Potter, the movie, when they tried to bring Harry when he's 17 years old to the safe house at the Weasley's house, and there's all the commotion and everybody's trying to kill each other and everything. Then they land and everybody's not sure who the other person is, and they attack them and they say, "Tell me what the last thing I said in this office at that time." That's the way you convince people that it's there. Now, that's a very dramatized version of what I'm talking about, but it's the same kind of concept. How can you convince me that you are you? Well, usually, when you're used to it, you just automatically know the person and you don't have to be convinced. But if there's any convincing to be done, it's done that way. For example, with the discussions with Maharishi and others that were on January 2nd of 2014, Maharishi really wanted me to talk to Jerry Jarvis. And I only knew Jerry a little bit. Kelvin knew him a lot better. But Maharishi had lots of different things to do to convince Jerry that I was actually talking to Maharishi. And Jerry got convinced very quickly because only he and Maharishi knew different things. And not only did that convince Jerry, but it also was pretty convincing to me too, on top of my other conviction, because I didn't know what they were talking about at all. I only knew Maharishi told me to say this to Jerry. Jerry came back and said, "Oh, that can't be anybody but Maharishi, because only he and I know that." So that kind of thing, and then the jokes that went back and forth between them. I think if you have a relationship with somebody that's that long, and that has not that much fear in it, that you can talk to the other side, then there's often a sense of humor about everything too. Just like there is in our relationships with our family and everything, if you're comfortable, there's almost always a sense of humor. Whether the humor is good or bad, that depends on how funny the person is. But so I'm talking a little bit about why we experience it differently, but we have no fear. Now, my sister Mary, obviously, from those of you who heard the story, she'd passed away and I talked to her first. And I talked to her then, and I talked to her the next day and the next day. And then I didn't hear from her from about 12 days. I heard from her again. And then I heard from her about 6 months later. But I haven't heard from her very much because she's not comfortable with she's not comfortable, and I'll tell you why. She's not comfortable because she's afraid if she communicates too much with us that she'll miss the life that she slipped out of. Instead, she wants to be involved in the life she's in now. And I think that's the way most people feel. Most people feel that way so much that they don't want to communicate with the other side. They're afraid to for lots of reasons, but even a little bit of fear will get in your way. So now, how do you increase the probability? It's just like dating in high school. You know, how do you increase the probability of getting a date in high school? Being confident. If you think that nobody will date you, you can guarantee that it won't happen because you won't ask anybody, right? So there's the one thing about asking, but the other thing is about being confident. If you're really not confident and you ask somebody, your lack of confidence shows, and it doesn't really make the other person, as eager as they otherwise would. Maybe they will be because no one has asked them before, so they don't mind a person who's nervous and without confidence. So there's a whole range of experiences. But I just point that out because it's a barrier of fear that's in our own minds that gets in our way of communicating with people right here. Now you add to that the barrier of fear of death, the fear of death, as Kelvin always talks about, overcoming the fear of death. That fear is a much stronger fear. Maharishi, for example, has no fear of this. He moves back and forth more than almost anybody that I know. But lots of other people do too. You don't have to be a Maharishi to do this. It's really just about one thing. It's not about attaining a spiritual state of consciousness that allows you to do it. It's about diminishing the fear. So to increase the probability, you just get more confident that there is life that goes on after death. And then what do you want out of it? And what you want out of it, what your motives are, will also affect who talks to you, who you communicate with. So first, I don't think it's very necessary in any way whatsoever. We have all kinds of communication with people on this side that doesn't go very well. So if we are having difficulty communicating with people that we could communicate with here, of course, it's going to be even a little bit more difficult on the other side. So communicating with other minds is a really valuable part of life, but it doesn't have to be the other side. What's important, I think, for everybody is to know themselves, as Kelvin always says too, and we said in ancient Greece quite often, know yourself. Try to understand yourself, and don't ever think you'll have perfect knowledge of yourself, but try to know yourself. So if you get a little bit more comfortable with yourself and a little bit less fear about the barrier between life and death, and a little bit more focus about who you want to talk to and why, each of those things will increase the probability that you will succeed. But if you don't succeed, you'll still get to know yourself better anyway, which is the most crucial part of it. As I'm sure Kelvin has mentioned plenty of times, if you don't remember anything about your past lives, it doesn't matter. You are carrying the effect of everything that you've done in your personality. Your passions and your fears are the big giveaway of what has affected you the most in your life. And almost everybody can watch what their passions and fears are. And if you're too afraid to know what your passions and fears are, everybody around you is willing to tell you. and usually they complain about them. You don't have the same passions and fears, at least in the same degree that I do. And therefore there must be something wrong with you. That's generally the way that goes. Obviously not true. So I think, Kelvin, you think that takes care of Jody's question?
I think so. I have some does anybody have a follow-up to that before I ask some of Harold's questions here? Anybody want to follow up live? You can just take yourself off my mute. You got to follow up to what George said.
Oh, I'd like to ask something.
Yeah, go ahead. George.
So, you told us about how you first experienced your past life memories. And I'm wondering when George first started experiencing his and when he realized he knew you. Because it sounds like he realized he knew you before you realized you knew him
Yeah,
from a past life.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
All right. So I had a lot of experiences as a child that Kelvin would put into the pre-clarity state. But I was aware that I probably had a past life about 6 months into meditating. But I wasn't completely sure. The first time that I was extremely sure was when I was in Hong Kong teaching with Kelvin. I didn't say anything to him about it. And I read almost all the books I could get by myself to find out what I had been thinking clearly, because I was in the middle of teaching TM and I knew that something was off, something was wrong, and I needed to focus on that. And so I wanted my own experiences. The most dramatic experience I had was while I was still in Hong Kong. So I was 21, 22, was right after Kelvin had, a couple months after Kelvin had left Hong Kong. Some of the other people who volunteered at the TM Center to help out wanted to go see Jesus Christ Superstar. And I had liked one or two of the songs from the soundtrack. I had the soundtrack when it came out on a disc, not disc, on a record. And but I went along with them, and I found it not a convincing version at all. So I was kind of sitting through it. But when they started to lash Jesus, I started crying. And I cried for about 10 hours, I'd say. And they took me home. They'd never seen me even get weepy before, I mean, in any way whatsoever. It really freaked them out, the volunteers. But I explained enough, and then I knew all that, and I also knew my relationship with Jesus, and that whatever they did to him, whatever they do to me, it's not going to get in the way of our relationship, and it's not going to kill him. It's not going to kill me, and that I'm totally independent of him, and he's independent of me, and we're good friends. So that was my conclusion after that point. So I was very sure. I didn't know exactly who I was, but I knew that we had been good friends at the time. And over the next period of time, I remembered a lot of the details. And so that was 76 or so. When I got more details, it was 75 when I had that experience. And so among all those memories, I know Kelvin tells the story about me finding them in the ditch. Among all those memories, I had the memory of finding Kelvin in the ditch sometime in 1976. And we ended up talking about it at the end of 77, right? So maybe 18 months before we talked about it. And, we talked about a lot of things all the time, but this was, I don't think, it sounds like, of course, everybody wants to do this, but I don't think it's a good idea to try hard to open up your memory bank. There's a reason you don't want to remember these things, and that's why you don't. You're afraid of them. You're afraid of the pain. You're afraid of the suffering. I'm weird, about how I think about these things, because I think of everything as something I can learn from and something that I can turn into a better theory. It's a very unusual thing that I developed a long time ago, and it's because reality was not matching my stories about it, my theories about it, or the movement's attempt to change humanity. There was all kinds of things that didn't fit. It's true that a lot of things fit, but my example for that is when people said the earth was flat, how did they figure out it wasn't flat? Well, figured it out theoretically because of the angles of the sun at noon 97% of all your experiences say the earth is flat, especially in ancient times when you didn't travel. Certainly not by plane, but even now, if we didn't travel by plane and had no vision from up there, we might think it's still flat. That's the way it looks. But we know from, if you did enough math and geometry and everything, you could tell, in addition to the fact that when you looked up in the sky, the things that you saw were all round or spherical. But you could kind of tell. And then you did the math, and the 3% that didn't fit the flat earth thing is what gave you the idea that, boom, that can't be the right answer. It has to be a sphere. And it was done mathematically, and you didn't see it, you just could tell. So that approach is how I looked at everything after a while, because I could tell 97% of what we were saying made sense, but some things were causing problems, not just a little bit, but they were making us be ineffective. So anyway, that's a little bit of is that enough, Mary?
Julie? Is that good? I think that's good for Julie, yeah. You got another question? Another question? Somebody else? Here's a question I'll just read. People can just pipe up, take yourself off mute and ask questions. But when you say that these spirits or beings are on the other side, where are they exactly? What's the other side mean? Is it another dimension, another physical world, a different vibration in this world, or something different?
All right. Well, I think everybody has their own experience, who has experiences, and their own conclusion about this. And I'm a skeptic about everything, and therefore I keep coming up with the different explanations myself. So what I say now, I probably will disagree with in 1,000 years, but you're not going to be here. Oh, you maybe will. And Kelvin will probably still be running these. It could be, okay, we're not. But this is the way I look at it personally. It seems to me we're all in this physical space of Earth and the environment around the Earth. All the beings everywhere. And how many people, how many minds are involved? To me, my experience, every insect, every mind is a light being. Every single mind. Well, that's the distinction between matter and mind, is minds make decisions. Minds can do things not against the laws of physics, but they manipulate the laws of physics to get done what they want done. So you see an anthill, it's very clear that minds have readjusted the dirt for what they want. Now, minor detail, but all minds are like that. And how many minds are there? Well, we know how many insects there are. So it's quintillions. There's at least quintillions of minds on this planet. And how many are human? Billions. And how many are interested in this? Tens of millions, hundreds of millions. And why? Because they have enough experience or carry enough experience with them that they want to integrate that idea in with the rest of their life. A funny thing about the other side is I think it was vaguer until Jesus and Jehovah started to structure it. I think that, if you look back and you see what people said about it, it was a world of shadows. It was a world of, not much was going on, or there was all kinds of ancient ideas about it that were based on people's experiences of it. But I think one of the things that Jehovah and Jesus have done is they've given structure to it so that people can join groups that they're in and comfortable with on the other side. I don't think the other side is that much different. I have an analogy for the NDEs that people have. You die, or you almost die, or you leave your body and you're there and you experience beings of light, or you experience your relatives, and if they're not your relatives and you don't know who they are, and they're saying to you, here, come with me, come with me. I don't mean to throw too much skepticism in it. That's not much different than walking down the street in LA and being outside of the Church of Scientology and, feeling kind of lost and not know where you are. And then two guys come out and they say, oh, you look a little lost. We know exactly how to fix that. Come on in, we'll take care of it. And it's very generous and kind, but they also have their own agenda, right? And they want you to reinforce their opinion about life. That's the difference between belief and reason. If you have a reason for what you're doing, you don't need anybody else's opinion. You'll be looking for other people's opinions and other people's reasons, looking for an even better reason. but you don't need anything to support you. If you realize that 2 + 2 = 4, everybody, even scientists, can be saying, no, it's not always 2 + 2 = 4. And you know that they're either inaccurate or they don't understand the concepts involved in number. They stretch them, and by stretching the concepts, they stretch the answer, but that's not what you're talking about. So the fact is, almost nobody relies on reason. Almost everybody relies on beliefs. And if you have beliefs, you want as large a number of people to share your belief as possible for you to have more confidence in it. So there's a lot of people, a lot of groups on the other side that share the same belief they had here, and now they're on the other side sharing that belief. So that was a tangent. What was the focus of the question?
Yeah. So I have a variation on that one. So
Yeah.
wherever they are on the other side, can they see what's going on in this world? Can they interact with beings in this world? Obviously they can.
Yeah. So yeah.
About that.
Yeah, to go back to the big idea, where is it? I think it's right here. I don't think there's another dimension. I don't think there's another zone. I think they're right here. They're not seeable. If you can see auras, you might be able to see them. Otherwise, you can't see that frequency of light with your eyes. And most of the time you can't. But I think it's all right here. I think there's a few TM teachers in the crowd, so I'll tell you a funny story about exactly that. So Charlie, who knows Charlie Lutz, was a leader at the beginning of the TM movement. He passed away a long time ago. And well, just a few years ago, I was in my kitchen cleaning the dishes. And I was thinking about a particular guy up in the state of Washington who was dying. And he was somebody who had known Charlie and was a friend of Charlie's from before. And I was thinking about him. And as I was thinking about him, Charlie Lutz came by. And I don't really know Charlie Lutz that well. I've known him in the past, but I didn't know him in this lifetime. And Charlie came by and he said, "What's this? What's this? What's this?" And then he was gone. It took about 30 seconds. And each "what's this" came, I mean, that was the words that I heard, but each came with a different meaning. The first "what's this" was, what are you, why are you thinking about my friend? And so I know as part of it that Charlie was traveling up the east coast of California up to the state of Washington at a very fast speed. I don't know how fast, but he was traveling. But he was in the same space that we were in. And he felt me thinking about his friend and that his friend was dying. So he felt that and he honed in on it. And he came to see me. Now, that sounds magical, but you know, if you're in a big room at a party and there's 500 people chatting and everybody's in groups of 5 or 6 and everybody's chatting and you're listening to the conversation in your group, but then you suddenly hear your name said by somebody 2 or 3 groups over, right? This happens to a lot of people. This is not magic because your ears are hearing all those sounds and filtering them all out, but your name is so important to you that you're going to hear it in the middle of it, what you're focusing on. You're still going to hear it when someone mentions your name 2 or 3 groups over. And that's the way people find each other on the other side. That's the function. It's just we recognize the thoughts that are important to us in other people. So anyway, he recognized this guy that I was thinking about, his friend. He stopped. He says, "What's this? Like, what are you doing thinking about my friend?" And then he said, "What's this?" And he meant, "Oh, it's you. You, I know you, but why are you here?" And then he says, "What's this?" And then what he was saying was, you're the one who did that 30th November thing. What are you up to? Sort of, what are you up to? Well, I don't have time for it. I'm gone. And then he was off to see his friend before he passed away or to help him transition to the other side. And that's an experience that just kind of confirms the idea that he's in the same space. And like, you know, we share this space with all different kinds of light, all different kinds of radiation, all different kinds of radio waves that are moving at different. We're not aware, we don't see all those things, but all those things are there. There's plenty of space for everything that's there. So I think we're all here. I don't know about whether we ever go anyplace else or not. I don't have any memory of that. I know Kelvin does, but I don't have any memory of being outside that sphere of the planet.
But
So
what you
that's
what,
it.
what you
That's
talk
the-
what George is talking about is whether he doesn't have any memory of being not incarnated here on planet Earth. I do. So
Yeah.
so here's another thing that's come up, and a number of people are asking this. And if you've come in late and you didn't hear the full answer that George was answering the first question, I'm asking you to, we're not going to go back and revisit a question that's already been talked about. Several people have asked me to go back and have George repeat. No, you can watch the recording of this afterwards, and then you can catch the complete answer of what the first question was that he talked about. Okay, so I want people to understand that we want to cover as much new material as possible and not just keep going over the same thing that you could hear on the recording later. Okay, so but here's another piece of somebody's question here. Another question is, are there harmful or bad entities on the other side? If we come in contact with one, are they past human lives or other entities? Are they past human lives or the other entities? Are they able to harm us in this world?
The answer is yes. And the answer to the question, do they exist? And this is sort of one of the things that made me least interested in talking about the other side, because people will mostly focus on that and be afraid. They can't do you any harm. They can scare you, but only if you let them be scared. And you know, it's like being in a herd of antelope. You know, if your leg is broken, that's who they go after. And that's who the predators go after. People who are negative are all around us. We have all kinds of people that are human that have those attitudes towards other beings. And it's based upon insecurity. I think maybe I'm going to go off into a theoretical point here to make the point about why they're not harmful. And I'm sure that you've heard Kelvin talk about my idea about transcending cruelty. We've been looking for an explanation, I'm talking about the movement and everybody who's involved in this for a long time, of what's called evil. And in my 20s, when I was doing my work on this, I thought, you know, part of the problem is that we think that everything is opposites. And they really are not opposites. It's more of a spectrum on a curve. And that more nuanced approach is going to be very helpful, because when you say it's either good or evil, you're not really giving much clarity to the situation, except for you feel it's evil, you feel it's good, and so you're very adamant about it. Now let me explain. There's something objective and something subjective at the same time. So my analogy is hot and cold. We all feel things are hot or things are cold or things are just the right temperature. But why? There's an objective reality. The objective reality is that every object has internal motion. And the higher the internal motion is in the object, the hotter it is to us. Our bodies happen to be 98.6 degrees. So anything that's 125 and up seems really hot. Anything that's down below 32 seems really cold. But if our body's temperatures were 150, then hot wouldn't be, then 125 would be getting towards cold. And 200, it would take 200 to be hot. And you can put yourself at any point along that spectrum, that objective spectrum, and where you are, above you is hot and below you is cold. But you could be adamant, this is hot and this is cold all the time, because this is the way you individually experience life. So I think good and evil are almost exactly the same thing, that there is a certain way of living life. We have these rules. I mean, they're not rules in the sense that you have to obey them, but people don't have to obey anything. They can do whatever they want to, but some rules are unavoidable. And one of those rules is if you desire something, if you fulfill it, you'll be happy. And if you don't fulfill it, you'll be unhappy. There's nothing you can do about that except for get clever about fulfilling your desires. So there's an objective framework in which we all operate in our minds. And we call, if we're good at life compared to other people, we call ourselves good, or we're not that good at it. We call people who are much better good. And then we call people who are much, much better divine. And we call people who are not as good at what we think is life, purpose and everything. Even it's just our theory, but we call them bad at life, and the ones that are really bad, evil. But there's an objective standard, and there's a thing. Now, it's ironic that if you took the personalities of the whole human race and you laid them out on a curve, on a bell curve, what's ironic is that at the lower end of the curve, we'll just say the psychopaths and the sociopaths are, and they're looking ahead at the whole bulk of humanity being ahead of them, in a sense. And what do they think about humanity? Oh, people are stupid. They're too good to be true. They're too kind to each other. They don't know that life is a dog-eat-dog world, and that we only understand what's going on. And they're all idiots, which they're marks. We can take advantage of them, and et cetera. And then in the middle of the range, if you ask somebody, are other human beings good or bad? It's, oh, everybody's kind of all right. They're all kind of like me, yeah, sometimes I'm foolish, sometimes I do this, sometimes I'm a little bit mean, but in general, we're all pretty decent. And then you take the people at the high end, the top artists, the top scientists, the top religious leaders. What do they all say? Oh my God, humanity is in really serious need of help. I got to get a 12-step program or a 10-step program, or how about 10 commandments? How about this? The attitude of the far end people is that humanity isn't doing so well, because this is where they are looking back at the bulk of things. And that's all a perspective. So my approach when I understood that was to step back from the whole thing and say, what's in common throughout the entire range from the psychopaths to Jesus, basically, of what's going on in life, and get those principles, those rules, and then everybody can just apply them how they want to. So to go back to your question about ghosts and everything, this approach of looking at it that way allows us to say what's evil. It's probably better to just completely drop the idea of evil. And what is it that really we call evil? What's so bad that really drives us crazy is what I call cruelty, how I define it. I define cruelty as taking pleasure in somebody else's pain. So who wants that? You don't want anybody around you to be taking pleasure in your pain. Now, we all do it in minor ways every once in a while, but in big ways, this is exactly what you don't want around you. Okay? Now, why does anybody seek to find pleasure? Everybody's seeking to find pleasure all the time, but why choose the desire to see somebody else in pain? Only because you yourself are in pain, and you're looking to keep yourself in the same slot in the hierarchy so that you can feel good about yourself. So why is it that when somebody loses their job for the first time, they're 30 years old, they've been a fairly decent, family man, they go home, they beat their wife, they yell at their kids, they might beat the kids. They never did this before. Why? Because they just felt hit hard by what happened to them, and they wanted to keep their position in that family at the top. Unfortunately, that adaptation is a maladaptation, because all it does is make you be around more and more miserable people. You should feel just the opposite. You should say, I'm going to be around people who are much happier than I am, because I'll learn something about them. I'll learn how to be happy. I'll enjoy being around them, etc. So instead of when something bad happens to you, you could do it that way. So all that said, the evil people, the ghosts, and anybody that wants to give you a hard time, either from the other side or from this side, all those people are suffering. They're all suffering in their own minds, and they want to make sure that they're better than you. Ironically, almost everybody looks at life that way. You almost always have to come up with an explanation to yourself. Don't usually tell other people. An explanation to yourself why it's good to be you rather than somebody else. You don't have any choice. You have to be yourself. You can't stop that process. So instead, we've developed this habit of understanding why. If someone says, well, Einstein was brilliant, but I'm glad I'm not Einstein because he looks silly with that hair all over the place, or he looks silly with his tongue sticking out, which is why everybody likes that image of him. And best of all, Einstein is dead and I'm not dead. So it's better for me to be me than to be Einstein. And we do this about all of our top stars. We do that about all kinds of people because it makes us understand unconsciously anyway, why it is better to be us than to be them. So to go back to the ghosts, which as I said, I don't like talking about them, but they're just weak minds. They're weak minds who haven't figured out how to be happy. And if they're trying to scare you or whatever, you can just laugh it off because they can't do anything to you. What are they going to do? They can turn your electricity on and off, and that's about as far as they get. And you know, it's really nothing that they can do to you directly, but they can play with your psychology. And I think it's really good, not just here, but everywhere, to have the confidence that you're in charge of your life and not somebody else.
So what I tell people,
Say anything about it? Have you had experience with dealing with people who've come to you with that problem?
So what I tell people, look, you lock the door. You don't leave your cars unlocked. That's the same thing with your mind. If you encounter people like that or beings like that, whether on this side or the other side, you excise them out of your life, meaning you leave them behind. You don't interact with beings like that. That's the thing, whether from the other side or this side. And you lock your car door. You don't leave your keys in your ignition. That's where the thief wants to go. So these people want to mess around with your mind. If you understand what George just described, you understand those principles. Understanding those principles helps you lock the door. Basically, that's what it does. So Tamara has a question she wants to ask.
All right, let me add one thing to what you just said. And yep. So the thing is, if you lock the door but you're not afraid, if you're just being practical about it, if you lock the door and you're not afraid, you're the last person these people are going to come to bother because they can't get anywhere with you. And so they leave you alone. They go other places. And you could say it's not generous of me to make them go someplace else, but you know, there's nothing you can do about that. And the more that you do it, the more other people will do it your way, and the less access those other minds have. And that's the only way we're going to step down cruelty over time, is for the people who can resist it to make it not fun for the people who enjoy it.
Right.
I know that's a big job, but we need to start at each point, you know, with moving forward.
Yeah.
So
the fear keeps promoting cruelty. That's the bottom line. Yeah. So acting from a place of confidence and no fear is the equivalent of locking the door, and you become a pain in the neck for those other beings, is the way I say it. You're a pain in their neck. They're going to go elsewhere. And
same thing is true with bosses that behave that way in your job. You know, if you treat them, I had a trick in New York at the law firm that I worked at. You know, not exactly an environment of calmness and it was high intensity operation. But what I did was, whenever anyone was a bully or anybody was behaving a certain way towards me or other people in the room, I listened to the words they said and I ignored their emotions. And then I answered the words. And that's extremely disconcerting to people who are trying to move your emotions around. Now, I'll tell one short story about that because it's entertaining and it shows how you can deal with the bullies. So I was working on a deal, maybe $300 million deal, and everything was all set to close. And what happened was the seller came in and wanted to renegotiate a whole bunch of terms. And the name wasn't Donald Trump, but other people are like that too. So they renegotiated a whole bunch of terms. And their documents were maybe 200-300 pages worth of documents that were related to the deal. All of them had been done and in final form already, but then they renegotiated all the terms. So they finished their meeting at about 8:30, and then I was there, and then I left. Okay, I'll get those 200, 300 pages ready as soon as I can to make sure that all the new terms are in and that there's no conflict and that the old terms are gone. So I did that. And at about 10:30, only 2 hours later, a guy came into my office, and there was a room full of people sort of waiting for the documents and the final version to review them. And he said, you know, so-and-so wants to talk to you. I'm not going to give his name. He was the executive vice president of the seller. not the person I was working for at all. I was working for the buyer. So the seller wanted to see me. So I said, okay. So I went up, I walked into the room, and as soon as I walked in, his whole team, he had 10 guys on his team. His whole team were cringing like this, like they knew it was about to come. So he clearly did this all the time. And there were 3 or 4 other people from my side there. And so I stood at the front of the table that they were all sitting around, like a big U-shaped table. And he was over here and he said to me, well, are the documents ready yet? And I said, no, of course not. I said, you just finished this 2 hours ago. There's 300 pages to fix and it's got to be perfect. And he said, well, really, you should be done by now. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I must be a slowpoke. And then he reamed me for about 15 minutes, just yelling and screaming at me for not having it done. So I stood there and I listened to it, and I looked around the room and I watched his team. They all were obviously used to it. They all had their heads down, their eyes averted, looking down, stuff like that. And when he was all done, I was standing there and he said, now, are you going to go and get it done? And I said, well, I'm sorry, but it'll be 15 minutes later than it would have been if you hadn't yelled at me for 15 minutes. And you could tell everybody on his team wanted to laugh, but couldn't, because nobody ever talked to him like that. And you know what? He was fine with me after that. And a lot of bullies are. They just, I don't know, they just like to dominate the room, but they only dominate the people who they can dominate. And that's just true about the other side. I think one thing to take away from thinking about the other side is the personalities are almost identical. There's some differences, but not many. In some ways, there's more psychological hierarchy on the other side than there is here, because there's not the other hierarchies that we have, that we set up here on, material hierarchies. Who has this car, who has this house, all that kind of stuff. So psychological gamemanship is actually maybe a little bit more active on the other side than it is here. Believe it or not, it's kind of hard to believe it could be any more active than it is here. Anyway, so.
Yeah. So Tamara has a question, and then I'll go to Jamie, and then we'll see if other folks want to speak up their questions. Go ahead, Tamara.
Hey, Kelvin and George. Nice to meet you, George.
Thanks. Nice to meet you too.
I was wondering, you had mentioned that you and Kelvin met in Egypt. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you had any insight as to how the pyramids were built and places like Stonehenge, if you knew any magical secrets about that.
No, I don't think that there was any magic involved. I don't think that came from, I think it was pretty much slave labor that built the pyramids. I do remember from 4,000 years ago putting something under the paw of the Sphinx that I thought might help prove reincarnation in the future. So I remember that kind of thing. But I think a lot of that, and I felt at the time that the Sphinx was designed to make people think. I myself was always looking for things that would last from one life to another, that could give people this continuity. One of them was the sun. Just the sunrise is always so gorgeous. Sunsets are gorgeous. And just, I think the focus on the sun and where sun worship ended up coming from was an attempt to try to make people feel something. But the constellations, I'm quite sure, the fact that you drew pictures in the sky were there for people to feel it over and over again. I happen to have a brother who was an older brother who was very interested in astronomy too. But in another life, he did the same thing with me. He showed me Orion when I was 3 years old. And I knew this. I knew this. This is like passing on. Keep seeing that, because we keep seeing that. And even though we didn't think about reincarnation or anything else, there's something about that image and that story that keeps being passed on and resonates with your depth. So I definitely, the sun is not turned into something else. But I think the constellations, and they're not all the same. People in different places have told different stories, drawn different constellations. I definitely think that that's an attempt to try to create continuity. Stonehenge and the pyramids, it's the narcissism of the pharaohs mostly, and making the slaves do it in the off season. They did it in the off season when they weren't farming. So instead of sitting around, I'm sure there are other details. But it took 100 years to build those things. So I don't know if there's any major, but there was certainly people studying math and astronomy and geometry, and some of their ideas were really bad, but I probably thought they were really bad because I'd been doing it for a while myself. And so I said, well, this isn't ahead, but this is ahead of where I am. I'm going to learn from that I've left that idea behind before. But the interest was very strong in a certain class of people in all those things. And that astronomical geometrical knowledge is very precise in the buildings. And just in general, I mean, in one of my lives, I talked about the harmony of numbers and how important it is that numbers and geometry influence the way we think. And then that idea was used to create harmony in architecture by using numbers that matched each other. Like you have 8, 5, 3, you use numbers that match up in a way that when you visually see it, you like it. Because it has, you've done something clever and sophisticated in the way that you've recreated things. So an anthill looks cool from one point of view, but a temple looks even cooler because there's a lot more sophistication went into it. Or you have a Greek theater that's built and it's built in sections and you can't see it unless you know it, but there's 3 and then 5 and then 8 and then the stage is 5 and 3 and 8. And those kind of geometrical numbers make it look really cool. In addition to that, the acoustics are good. So I think all that building in Stonehenge, I don't have any connection with Stonehenge, but people were so keen on those things. And of course, there was no distraction either. All through the winter, what did you do? So you could have a big project like that if you had a leader, especially if the leader was like a druid leader or something like that. If Kelvin was a druid, he would have talked people into building something like that, right? Instead of a crusader castle. So, that's all you need. You only need somebody like Kelvin and a bunch of people who with nothing to do. And then you take it one big rock at a time and tilt it up and say, what a cool thing we've built for ourselves, right? So I think that's what's behind it. It's entirely possible that some stuff has been communicated to us from other people and so on. But that's a good place to talk about a different thing that happens in NDEs. A lot of people say, I had a moment where I was omniscient and I knew everything and the whole universe and all its secrets was revealed to me. And then you ask them, could you tell us some of those secrets? No, I can't remember any. So the feeling of omniscience is something 2-year-olds get too. That they and teenagers feel that they're can't be destroyed. They're indestructible. Those feelings are nice, but if you actually have real knowledge, if you know everything, then give the doctors more information. We're trying really hard, and we're only at 3% or something of understanding what's going on with our bodies. So you can look at that and say that biological engineering that goes into our bodies, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But it's not omniscience that requires that, to make that. All that's required is maybe 500 times the knowledge we have now, or 5,000 or 500,000, but it's within reach that we'll figure it out if we have enough people working on it. That's the way I look at it. Lots of other people look at it very differently, but I know who I think are some of the smartest people I've ever met, and I've read all kinds of other people that I haven't met, and so I kind of have an idea about what the smartest people are. They're not anywhere near omniscient. I mean, they're much closer to one step ahead of everybody else. Like everybody has 2 cents to contribute to our society, and some of these people maybe contribute 3 cents, but most of their contributions have been adjusted by the people to what they want, much more than they change people. I think, whatever their idea is, that idea gets adjusted to what the people want, if it's going to get popular. Otherwise, it doesn't get popular. And
right.
So I think the power of all of our minds is every individual mind is always itself 2 cents. Everybody gets 2 cents contribution on this planet. Some people made their way up to 3, but no one's got $1 billion and is spending it, and nobody is that far ahead of everybody else. And some people are only at 1 cent, but we don't worry about the insects too much. We'll stick with the 2 centers, the human beings.
Get to some other questions, George. So Jamie?
Hi there. Hi. Hi, I'm here. Hi, George. Thank you very
Hi,
much.
Jamie.
Just trying to gather my thoughts here, because when I received the email from Kelvin to say that you'd be on, I don't know whether I was nervously excited or excitedly nervous. I don't know. I don't know why. I feel maybe there's a connection between us somewhere. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is, but anyway.
I recognize you too.
Oh, okay.
I don't know where either, but I recognize you. When the whole gallery came up first, I recognized you right away.
Wowzers.
Sorry.
Okay.
I hope it wasn't a problem.
No, well, I haven't lost any sleep over it, but it was an unusual feeling that I had. I don't get this very often. I don't think I've had it before, actually, about anyone. But anyway, it's really great to see you and speak to you. So, when you mentioned in the not Tamara's question, the question before about the range of people, I found myself getting a bit downhearted, because I was expecting you to say the people at the higher end of the range, if we could say that, would be seeing the rest of humanity in like a higher way. Like, yes, it's even better than the people in the middle who are saying, yeah, it's okay, they're like me and that sort of thing.
Right.
Why do you think that is, that they're thinking Christ of humanity is going down the toilet?
It's a perspective, just like, Socrates mentioned this, that we don't choose evil over good ever intentionally. It's a matter of perspective. How close are we to seeing it? And if it's far away, we can't measure it against something that's close to us. And so I think the movement is working on eliminating this idea about humanity. My friends in this, with this group of people have been working on this for a long time. We realized that this was a mistake, and that mistake is, I think that group of people will dump this mistake within 100 years at the longest. They're very fast movers on these things.
State the mistake again, George.
Yeah, the mistake is to not respect free will. In trying to make the human race happier, that was the goal. The mistake was, we know what makes us happy, but we didn't have a clear idea about what happiness was for every mind. As I said, you step back from the whole thing, you get a different angle on it. And when you step back, you say, okay, happiness is caused by fulfilling your desires, right? Now, your motives are your deeper desires. So those also have to be fulfilled for your happiness. But the quality of the happiness is just another thing I talk about. The quality of the happiness depends upon the quality of the desire. Now, what we did by saying, this is what you should do with your life, and even if we didn't say it like that, but just lived our lives and people tried to copy it, that makes people obedient, right? And actually, in most religions, obedience is one of the crucial virtues. But obedience, in my opinion, is actually a vice. It undercuts the quality of your happiness. And that voluntary cooperation with other minds, that creates a virtuous situation, because otherwise you're alone in the world. But to just obey another mind means that your motive, so say the other mind says, thou shalt not kill. I'm going to be really bold about my example here. Thou shalt not kill. And the person says, oh, I really like killing people, but I'll obey that, I'll obey that. He says, he's a cool looking dude, and I'm gonna go with that. He looks happier than I am, so I'm gonna do that. I'm not gonna kill anybody. But the person submerges that desire to kill and the pleasure to kill that he has had in his mind for a long time, and he's obedient. And then he says, I'm not having any fun not killing. Why? Because what he's really doing is he's not killing people, he's obeying some other mind. And the quality of obeying another mind is not the same thing as Jesus not wanting to kill anybody. Jesus just doesn't have that desire, because he has a completely different relationship with all the other minds. And so by giving people our behavioral patterns, even intentionally with the 10 Commandments or unintentionally by people copying, I mean, people want to eat the same foods, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean anything. It's what do you adopt? And if you adopt it based on obedience, the real desire you have is to obey because you think there's going to be a reward for obeying, either to become as happy as that person you think it is, or because that leader believed that everybody only had to copy their behavior and really said, obey me and do this and you'll get to where I am. And so whether that's enlightenment or heaven or whatever, or even a billionaire, billionaires do the same thing with people. You always I like the books that come out and say how you can make $1 million in real estate, and that's what I did. I made $1 million in real estate. And you always wonder, yeah, but now you're selling books because that's how you think you're going to make your real money. That must be better than real estate, or you'd just be out there working in real estate, So obedience is made us think that we're being virtuous when we're actually adopting a slave mentality. And so that quality is against the reality that we all have free will and shouldn't be obeying anybody. We make all our decisions, including the decision to obey. But that's going to give us a totally different quality of happiness. So I think happiness is totally lined up with real virtue. But there has been a muddle about both motives and about obedience and a couple of other things. And that muddle is partially caused by us who've been talking about it. But, we're making our way out of the swamp too, and so it's a very easy thing to get wrong, but it's a wonderful thing to get right. So I think that's going to make a big difference.
Hazel, go ahead. Hazel, get a mute. Yeah.
Hi, George. Thank you
Hi.
for being here for us.
I like the dog.
Oh, thank you. I'm a great animal lover. I have 3 rescues. That's another subject. I have this Kelvin for years I've known, and he's been trying to guide me and help me with my fears of life after death, or not believing, basically. I hear very loudly what you say, clearly, that be open, don't be afraid, it could stop. I wonder if there's anything that could help me, because obviously I always say I want evidence. I want my parents to, to see them and that they're okay and they've come back, right, or that it's okay. Or just believing, that there is something there. And so that I can be at peace, because my mind is constantly in turmoil, the fear. So I just wondered if there's anything at all I could do to help myself. Sure, Hazel. I mean, I think the important thing for all of us to understand right away that helps the most is to be realistic. And the reality is we're individual minds in a huge universe, right? And being an individual mind in a huge universe with all these other minds around us, all of whom can do what they want to, because they all have free will. We're in a dangerous situation in our minds, And so we feel that danger. And if everybody around us is cooperative and kind and so on, then we don't feel that danger because we feel comfortable. No one's going to we don't feel, but very few people are able to, all you have to do is go to middle school and that that this is, going to school with a bunch of other 12 to 14-year-olds, and that life is not just going to be comfortable. That there are people who are out to diminish us in order to raise themselves, right? And that's the form of cruelty that I was saying. Where does cruelty come from? It comes from just that. Diminish others to raise yourself. It doesn't always work, but it works enough that it's a very popular attitude. So if you accept that you're an individual mind in this universe, then there's a philosophical question to ask next. Do I last? Am I a body? Is my mind projected by my body? And do I last only as long as my body does? Or do I last outside that body? Am I something more than that body? You divide it into those 2 things. Those are the only 2 possibilities, right? To divide it once, okay? Now, when you die, There's only two possibilities, either that you were the body or that you were a mind. If it were you were a body, you don't exist anymore. You can't feel unhappiness. You can't feel anxiety. You can't feel any of those emotions that you're afraid of feeling. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether that's the truth or whether the other thing is the truth, whether we exist. Because every minute that we're alive, we are either one or the other. And it's not, I think we've scared ourselves silly with stories about how we're going to get punished in another lifetime. That's one thing. But that's not the only thing that's involved. It's also that we wonder, how are we going to do if we die? What's going to happen next? So what happens next is almost identical to what's been happening before. And so at any time that you can calm your mind down about what's going to happen, you can say to yourself, well, I'll tell you one of my other ideas. I call it witchy thinking, thinking like a witch, okay? And it's very common. And what it is we have all these things we don't want to happen. And somewhere along the line, we have experienced things in a way that we say, if I do this, it won't happen. It doesn't matter what the this is. If I carry a rabbit's foot, it won't happen. If I bring a pot of stew to a boil and put in 2 newt's eggs and eat it, that will make it happen. And then it won't happen. All those beliefs are most likely inaccurate. But we strongly believe in that something because we've experienced it one way or another along the line and concluded that's what stopped it from happening. We've probably made an error in judgment about it. But that way of thinking is how people deal with their anxieties. Now, it's important, as I said before, to think of yourself as an individual mind in the universe, because you shouldn't feel, oh, I should be perfectly happy and confident at all times. You know, that's unlikely to ever happen. So every step along the way of more confidence is more enjoyable. And if you get to the state where you thought you were aiming at perfect happiness, perfect, confidence, you would find that when you're there, you can think of something even better to do and a better emotional state. And so if you think of life that way, no matter how long it lasts, you can always improve on it and you can always bring it down a little bit. But you can't destroy it. You can't destroy your mind. If your mind is a body, when your body is destroyed, yes, your mind is gone. But if not that, your mind is indestructible. And there's in my opinion, there are physical reasons why we can think of our mind that way, and that it's really made out of something that produces photons. Photons are real physical things. That's where the light is coming from in light bodies. It's something really physical. It's not biological though, and it doesn't deteriorate the way biology does. So that's what I think our minds are made out of. But it doesn't matter, whichever answer is the right answer, it won't change how you try to do this, how you try to overcome your fears. So you just say to yourself, what am I afraid of happening? Is there anything I can do to prevent that? Like if you say, I'm afraid of nuclear war, just take a big one. There's almost nothing you can do. And the only thing you can do about that is if someone is running for office in your country, to be president or prime minister or whatever, and says, if I become president or prime minister, I'm going to have a nuclear attack. I'm going to nuclearly attack Russia, or I'm going to use the nuclear weapons that we have. Then don't vote for them. But that's all that you can do about nuclear war. So you have to take into account the fact that there are some things you have no control over. And it's calming to see that you can't make any decision for any other person too. Family members have a very tough time with this because you think, I could make that decision better than you. It's a good time to bring up this thing about gurus, because I'm sure Kelvin has talked about the fact that one of our conclusions in the movement is that nobody's going to be a guru again. Now, there are people who are taking bets that some of them will not be able to prevent themselves from doing it again because their habit is so strong. But the reason that we made that such a big principle is to not do that again is because the better you are at making decisions for another person, the more dependent they're going to be. actually, the worse you are at making decisions for other people, the more advantage you're giving them, because you're giving them the experience. Oh, don't listen to anybody else. But if lots of people can convince you that they have a better idea for your life than you have for it. But by getting the habit of obeying somebody else, you're undercutting your own decision making. So to go back to the fears, you just say, no matter how bad I am at this, no matter how much fear I have in my mind, how much fear I cause myself by the way I look at the world, I'm better at it for myself than anybody else could ever possibly be for me, because I'm the one making those decisions. And if you have family members that you make decisions for a lot, whether they're children or adults or your aging parents or anything, you can practice backing off by backing off on them. You love them. You're making those decisions for them to help them in their lives. But all you have to do is not make the decision for them, but just make a suggestion for them, right? Instead of saying, you might find this more enjoyable, rather than you've got to be a doctor or you've got to do this. And if you take that attitude towards the people you love, usually you'll get back to yourself and take that attitude towards yourself. And when you start making suggestions instead of demands on yourself, then you'll find that your anxiety goes down. So you can, not too many people do it philosophically, but that habit of backing off of demands to suggestions for other people that you love usually comes back on yourself. And every step of the way towards less anxiety is more enjoyable. And there won't be any state where you don't have any fear about anything, most likely. So if you're trying to achieve that, you'll just be frustrated and then fearful about being frustrated. So it's a subtle method, but it's pretty simple.
So in a way, you're saying accept how I am and just go with it. And
yeah, but accept how you are and accept the fact that you can't do certain things. But when you're going with it, you don't just go with the flow of the universe, because that means everybody else decides for you what you do. You say, okay, I'm looking at the universe. This is what I want to get out of it. I'm going to move. But I don't think just because I want to get something out of it, that I am going to be in command of the universe, or that other things won't happen, that I don't want to happen, because all the other minds are out there making their choices too. It's like a game. One of the things I think useful, because our games that we create for ourselves are so entertaining to watch other people play. But if you watch baseball or soccer or something like that, if you watch people play, even the superstars probably make more errors than they have total successes, right? So I use baseball in America, and I say, okay, if your batting average in life is 400, you're doing extremely well. You're a superstar. But the other people are batting in the 300s and the 200s. All of it is still a fun game. And nobody is batting over 500. Even Babe Ruth made more strikeouts than home runs, and every superstar in every sport, they make more errors than they succeed at. And that's the way I think it's a good analogy for life, because you could be a superstar and be very mad and angry and anxious that you're not doing better. And some are. Or you could say, yeah, I'm doing well enough. I'm doing well enough. And if I do this with less anxiety, I might improve much more quickly than if I try to improve with anxiety and fear.
So I want to just sum up what George just said. So, and I want to get, because we have a lot of other questions here, and we got 5 minutes, and we're gonna, and I'm gonna go over a little bit so we can get to some of these other questions. But so maybe you can give some succinct answers to some of these other questions. So
that's very hard for me to do.
I know, but to sum up what you're saying, Hazel, is we control what we can control and let go of what we can't control. That's what I've said for thousands of years, right? Control what you can control and let go of what you can't. So when you listen to what he just said, think of that through that filter when you go back and you listen to the recording of what he just said, okay? The long version of what he just said. Control what you control, let go of what you can't. Sheba, go ahead.
Wait, this is why I have Kelvin around. He always takes my distractions that go on for half an hour, and he goes, okay, that's 10 words. Okay, there's the answer.
Sheba, go ahead.
It's a good teamwork.
Hi, George. Thank
hi,
you so
Shiva.
much for thank you so much for being here. It's getting an hour and a half. Hopefully you don't do the same 3-hour talk here too. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, everybody is forewarned. I don't know when I'm talking that long, as I
It's
showed in that
okay.
lecture.
It's okay, George. I was just kidding. So one of the things that you mentioned on the talk is, the big message of the movement is really respecting our free will, right?
Right.
And then there was a point, I think you talked about prayer, and what you said about prayer or even yoga is like praying as a form of turning within is more helpful. And that was what you presented as the message from the movement. Could you expand more on what you meant by that? Prayer as a form of turning within. Thank you.
All right. Sure. Because even if you go back to what Jesus said about prayer, he kind of gave it a negative connotation. So I talked about that. Because most prayer is just stating what you're desiring that you don't have. I want this to happen. I want that to happen. And people can't, as I said, we know in the movement that if we just fulfill those desires, then it would just not be the same experience as if you created it yourself and made it happen yourself, right? So you won't get the happiness out of it. You'll get a totally different thing. That's why asking like that is not. So there are other forms of prayer where you just pay attention to what's going on in your mind. And if you're paying attention to what's going on in your mind and say, all you need is really the intention. I'm just going to pay attention to my mind. This is who I am. And if you do that, you've got 90% of what it is, 90% of what turning within is. If you don't have the habit of doing that, it's really good to have some technique, which is discardable once you have the habit again. But the technique shouldn't be the important thing. Yeah. So there's all different forms that people have. But all the ones that are trying to empty the mind, that's not what you want to do. You want to pay attention to what's in your thoughts and not worry that you're having thoughts and distracted. You kind of pay attention. What is it that I'm really thinking? Because, your mind, when it's free at night and it's dreaming, it says what it's really thinking. And it's never what we are when we have it corralled, it's not the same. So to know yourself, you have to know that part of yourself too. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that did. Thank you so much again for doing this.
And I didn't even take 3 hours. Was that better, Kelvin?
That was good. Gyro, go ahead. Did I lose you? Where'd you go? He was here a second ago. Where did he go?
Hello.
There you go. Go ahead.
Oh man, I had the problem this morning in another Zoom meeting because when I'm on a phone and I'm on gallery, then I don't know where to unmute myself. But if I
No, we got you
swipe
now.
over, then I figured it out. Okay, I'm getting better. Okay, so thank you for doing this again, and it's very I don't know if it's the right word to say entertaining or enlightening or just perplexing. And so I'm coming from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view and trying to compare and contrast what you know. And so and what one thought came up the last 30 meeting was Kelvin said something to the effect of there are no absolutes but then there are exceptions. So one thing he said was that caused me another question was that your soul can't divide, and so then I wonder if any of you can talk about what about identical twins? Do they divide, or two different souls get kind of inserted into the zygote or whatever?
Yeah, it's 2 different souls, and usually if they sign up for being a identical twin, that they like each other and are very close friends or something like that, think a lot alike, something like that. But I no, I don't think that there's one mind that then splits into 2, because that would There are a whole bunch of theories where you end up merging with another mind or merging with your angel or guardian angel in some places and stuff like that.
all those things are dramatizing the close friendships that can occur between minds. But just like people say, a married couple, you become one. Anybody who's been married knows that's not true. You know, you're never one with the person. If you have harmony, you did a good job, you know, of cooperating with another mind. Anything else from the Tibetan Buddhist point of view? It's a very interesting theory. So, but on the mind splitting thing, I think minds are either, that's another one thing or another question. Either you're a mind or you're matter. Matter doesn't make any decisions at all. Minds make decisions. That's, to me, the difference between them. And I think we cohabit this world together. The minds are making decisions, which rearranges the matter for themselves, but there's all these other minds also rearranging matter, so you never get everything you want with this. And unfortunately, a lot of the minds think that all the other minds are also matter, that they can rearrange at will. And this is the problem of not respecting the free will of all the other minds, right? So you respect it, then you can get them to cooperate to rearrange matter in some bigger way. Otherwise, everybody's just working in their own little village sort of situation. Nothing big like we have now in civilization never happens unless there's cooperation. But the Tibetan Buddhist theories, you know, have some things in common with the movement's current consensus. Certainly, the idea that there is nobody in charge, that made everything, and those ideas. But not so much the Tibetan Buddhism, but I find it very interesting that what happened in Buddhism was what Buddha had to say was fairly unpopular for a couple hundred years. And then a monk started explaining bodhisattvas, and that made it very popular. And why is that? The same thing happened in Christianity from a slightly different point of view. It's because the idea of bodhisattvas who are on the verge of enlightenment, which is what you're supposed to do with your life, the goal of life, they stop and don't do the goal of life. Instead, they help you get there. That means you're the center of the universe. Your salvation is the goal of the universe instead of the nirvana, emotionally. And unconsciously, when somebody gives you an idea, a set of ideas that you emotionally are the center of the universe, people buy that idea because that's how they feel. It's not accurate, but that's how they feel. And so it becomes popular. In Christianity, the idea is slightly different, but very similar. And that is that God loved the world so much that he sent his only son and sacrificed him so that everybody would be saved. Well, you know, Paul created that dramatization of what happened to explain Jesus's death and a bunch of other things. But sacrifices don't make God feel any happier. No, that's not, and certainly not the sacrifice of somebody that he loved and the pain of somebody that he loved. But emotionally, it tells you, well, God has his only one son. He must love him a whole lot, but he must love me even more because he made his son suffer for me. And people don't think that through, but that's the emotional core of why it's popular. I answered a couple other questions you didn't have.
Cool.
Anything else, Jera?
That's a good answer.
Good. Thanks for that. Thanks for your question. Any other questions before I go to some of that I have in the chat? And anybody want to say any questions live?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Kimberly. Yeah.
You said that we retain our personalities on the other side, and you know, a lot of our sort of personality traits, whether we're good communicators or extroverted, etc., come a lot from astrology. So do we choose similar astrology in our lifetimes, different lifetimes, or do we mix that up? And what part of our astrological earthly personalities actually are of our mind and being? If that makes sense.
That's a great question, Kimberly. Before you answer this, George, I want to read one that it segues perfectly or
Okay.
with Kimberly's. Okay, so it'll in addition to what Kimberly's asking, it's basically a same question. It says, when spirits reincarnate, when we reincarnate, do they have a choice of how or where or in what kind of circumstances or environment they will incarnate? I always have difficulty with the idea that people are born physically or mentally challenged, or what we used to call handicapped, who would voluntarily choose to reincarnate in that form. Is the person reincarnating taking a chance by having that possibility of reincarnating in that challenged condition? So that kind of fits also with what Kimberly.
All right, let me take that one first, and then I'll go to astrology.
Yep.
I think for all these questions, it's really important to know that there's a whole range of answers, because we're all different people with different motives, and we're going to all do things for different reasons. Okay, that's one point. Why would anybody want such a challenged life? Okay, people find that when you're very needy, that attracts the love of people who want to be your savior, who want to help other people who are in need. They might want to help other people in need for positive reasons, but they also usually do it for not so positive emotions, which is it makes them feel like they're superior to the people that they're helping. My example of why that's true, very few people are out to try to help rich people be happier rather than poor people in these situations. Why? Because they can't feel superior to the rich people in the circumstance. I'm talking emotionally, not financially. And so you have this situation, and there's a great deal of great work done like this, like Mother Teresa is well known for it, but it requires that the poor people be kept in poverty or in something else. So it's possible for somebody to say, I got a lot of attention and a lot of love when I was handicapped, when I was Down syndrome, when I was this. So there could be that someone will choose this on purpose for that reason. I don't think that's the majority. I think it's accidental, as a genetic accidental thing. And you can kind of tell when you talk to people in these situations, who's who. I won't go into detail about that, but you can kind of tell what their motives are in the situation. The people who get themselves into a needy situation when they weren't in one, like in middle age, I knew a heroin addict who had ideas that she'd come from another galaxy to help and stuff like that. And when I talked to her, there were moments I could get through to who she really was. And she liked it for a second, and then she got right out, bounced right back out of it, and put up her protective shield of this needy, problematic person. So it's partially chosen and it's partially not chosen, and each situation is different. And I think that's the way to think about that in dealing with it. It's a big problem from a social point of view and a legal point of view, but that's a whole nother issue. But just from a spiritual point of view, how do we think about other people? I think the easiest way to deal with it is to always think the person had a good reason for what they were doing. Whatever it is, they had a good reason for what they were doing. But if somebody is in great pain and it doesn't look like that was what they were doing for, that's a totally different situation, especially if they can never get out of their pain.
Let me just say one thing, and then you can go to the other part of Kimberly's question, and then we can go to you, Stokes. I think you may have something. So to this first part of this question that George is just answering, we have to remember that when we say we choose to come back and we make choices, yeah, we can make choices, but we're talking about that's from a mental consciousness, a mind emotional standpoint. What George is also saying is that we have a physical body. And so, yes, can we make choices mentally that can affect our physical body, that can create problems in our physical body? That's possible, but it's also the fact that our body has its own chemistry, its own structure that we cannot necessarily control. And so when we say choice, you got to remember there's a gray area there, and then there's also a black and white, you could say, in terms of the mind and the body. They influence each other. Yes, that's where the gray area is, but they are distinct from each other.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one other element that reminded me of is that most people in life make a lot of choices by happenstance, opportunistic. I'm there. I went by McDonald's, so I ate McDonald's, and they didn't plan anything out. And the same thing is true about choosing your families and where you're going to live and who you're going to be with and everything. Most people just kind of go with the flow of the universe. And a lot of people think this is a wonderful way but a lot of people going with the flow end up being fatalistic, and as Kelvin said before, you control what you can control. Don't believe you can control everything, but you can change things for the better quite a bit. So now I want to talk about astrology, and I'm going to throw in palmistry and fortune telling and everything all at the same time, because there's a reality to it, but the reality is coming from our minds. It's not in the stars. The stars aren't anywhere near where people assumed they were in these constellations. We know from modern science where those stars are, and they're not here, and the planets don't go through them. I mean, all of the basis for saying the conclusions about astrology and what the 12 zodiacs are and so on, that's all based on inaccurate information about the stars. However, it created confidence in people that they could do it. Now, I'm partially blamed for astrology, and that's not what I did. I was interested in the sun and a bunch of other things for those reasons. It was so long ago, nobody remembers. But I was doing it from a totally different point of view.
What was it? Was it 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years ago?
5,000, about 5,000 years ago. And then because I was interested in the sun and other things, people who developed astrology put my name on top of some of it. But in any case, so I have a thing about astrology. But palmistry or anything, if somebody believes that by reading the palm, they will be able to get some information for you, and they really believe it, they're confident in their ability, they're going to be able to do it. But what are they doing? They're usually taking it out of your mind. They're telepathically getting information out of your own personality, out of your own memories, things that may be even subconscious to you. And the same thing is true about astrology and any other skill like that. You learn to do a skill, and then you believe that it's happening. Catholic priests who believe that they turn the water and the wine, the water into the wine into the blood of Christ and the host into the body of Christ. They believe that they did that, but not every one of them. But lots of them believe that they've done it. They haven't done it, but they believe it and other people believe it, and it creates the right emotional reaction in the people who all believe it. These beliefs are very, very powerful. So and they have both positive and negative effects. But from a scientific point of view, the stars aren't anywhere near where people said they were in the astrology things. And I don't think, therefore, I've been born at all different times of the year and under all different kinds of signs, and my personality has been fairly steady. So that makes me think it has nothing to do with it from just my own personal point of view. But from a scientific point of view, I think so as well. On the other hand, I had a sister and a brother-in-law that were really into astrology, and then they each did my chart. And my chart, this was in my 20s, the charts were identical, but their interpretations were totally different. And the interpretations were based on, in my opinion, exactly what that person thought of me and what that person thought of me. It revealed more about what they thought about me than it revealed about me. But that's my idiosyncratic point of view on all those skills. And people who have those skills and are confident in them, you can keep. They're useful because you get into other people's minds and help them understand something about themselves. That's entirely a positive thing. So I'm not against the use of it, but I think it's like you're twirling your finger over here and you think that that's what's causing everything, but it has nothing to do with what's actually happening.
Stokes, you got a question?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. The first question would be about Buddha, and where does Buddha fit into the movement?
Well, Buddha was contacted right away. I don't think he was a part of the early things, but he's certainly been working together with movement and friends with the movement. So yeah, and we had a message for the Dalai Lama to deliver from everybody else, and I wasn't able to break through the Dalai Lama's security in order to deliver it to him, but he seemed to have gotten it anyway. Somebody else on the other side in the group must have passed it on to him. So that all happened in 2014. The Dalai Lama, just since you mentioned the Buddha, Paramahansa Yogananda also knows about the movement and knows about what's going on. And chatted with both Kelvin and I think Kelvin just briefly, I'm not sure.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
When I was getting a tooth pulled, he popped,
Trying to lighten things up.
he's trying to light things up. He pulled it. He popped in when I was getting a tooth pulled, literally.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think, you know, most of the people who are known have heard about it. Even the ones that weren't involved. I mean, it's been 9 years or so now, right?
Yeah.
And most of the people that have been active trying to do things similar to the movement. As I said in the 30th of November thing, the movement's just one small part of all these different groups that are trying to do something for humanity. But the characters have been influential I'm not saying their lives, but in the theories that they present and the stories that they've told have been very popular because they resonate with how people really are.
Okay, thank you. By the way, my wife and I were friends with Mary, so your sister.
Yeah. Quite a character.
Yeah, she was. So the other question I had, I've been reading lately about Meher Baba, who is apparently supposed to be an avatar. The whole idea of somebody being an avatar, how does that stand with the movement? Is that something that God or whoever he is could show up in human form?
I think the whole idea of avatar and versus just a guru or just somebody that's reincarnated, they're all part of the spiritual hierarchy ideas, which are going to dissolve under the new concept of free will. That it doesn't matter whether people are doing better or not. From some points of view, if we are all eternal minds, we're all equal as eternal minds, and so whatever the rules were for Avatar versus another one, you know, it was to try to distinguish who's doing better than somebody else, and obviously Avatar being supposed to be a direct person of a divine being. But to me, again, it has a little, I mean, I know it's a little silly to say, but it's a little bit like Comic-Con. You go and dress up as the person that you really want to be, and then you present yourself to the world as if you're Captain Kirk or you're Spock or somebody like that. And in this case, you know, you dress up as if you're Shiva, but you got to pull it off, you know. And so the people who do it that don't do very well at it, you know, everybody forgets. But the people, the minds that are close enough to that image of divinity and pull it off, they're going to be remembered. So the only one like that that's a little bit different is Krishna, because Krishna is well, he was a local deity, but he was turned into Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita by Vyasa, and Vyasa is the same person as Shankara, and Shankara said he used that character on purpose in here to have a stand-in for this. So Krishna is more a literary character than he is a real character. But at the same time, there's been all kinds of people who said they've been an avatar of Krishna, and that just means that they have similar personality, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they were Krishna reincarnated, if they don't make sense when they talk, you know, you have to listen.
Well, and the other thing,
we had a great, you know, I mean, since you know Mary, we had a great teacher, Maharishi, right, with a wonderful personality and so much attention to so many thousands of people. Now that was an outstanding example of that kind of thing. Someone could say he was an avatar or something, but the fact is, you know, he was also very human, and he himself says what mistakes he made and the errors he made. Maybe he didn't focus on that when he was here, but he certainly focused on it afterwards, because it's to your own advantage to not think of yourself as perfect, right?
Yeah.
If you think of yourself as perfect, you're always going to be wondering who's going to find out I'm not.
The other thing to remember, Stokes, is that out of 30th November is one of the major points that parallels the non-avatar, non-guru thinking is the non-divinity thinking. And so that's what these beings have been considered divine by the masses in the past are saying, we're not divine in the way that you're thinking, and we don't want you to continue to think of us as divine beings, et cetera. It's the whole notion of divinity and worship and blindly following. That's a major part of the message, as George said, that just promotes the slavery mentality, and it's actually one of the underpinnings that can create cruelty. Okay, not that those beings are cruel, but that the notion of believing in that way and divesting one's responsibility and giving up one's power to any other being, whether it be a divinity or whether it be the bully down the street, promotes a sense of weakness within oneself, and that promotes a susceptibility to being bullied and being treated cruelly by others, right?
Yeah, now
So
let me throw a wrench into the works here, because there's a practical reality that causes this as well, and therefore you have to use your thinking to get around it. The practical reality is some minds are just brighter than others, and some light beings are brighter than others, and they look more spectacular, and so the hierarchy can be created in that way, just like if you made a hierarchy on this planet of tallness or shortness, or whatever that's obvious, or how Hollywood does it. If you're really good looking, then you're different. So there is that brightness, and that doesn't mean that the physical brightness from that light beam means that they know anything more than before, but they're more focused, they're more concentrated, they have an idea about this, they have more energy, they're not as complicated, their emotions are freer. But you could have freer emotions and be a psychopath. So brightness all by itself is not the determining factor of anything whatsoever. And so I only mention that because your experience on the other side could be, it sure looks like a hierarchy to me. And that's absolutely right. You need your thinking to see through this. And what is convincing the people in the movement to drop that whole approach? We could say we're all mundane or we're all divine, but we don't have to separate, between the two. So, there's no distinction between the two. But what's making everybody move away from it quickly is realizing that for their own personal happiness, it's not a good way to do things. It doesn't help others as much, but it's not as much fun for yourself either. If you take responsibility for other minds who should be making their own decisions, you can be persuasive. So that's why I think it's going to be effective, because whenever somebody's self-interest involved, has a much better chance of winning in the long run than if you're like doing something out of duty.
Any other questions from folks live here in the audience?
So the thing about Jesus being the Son of God or being the avatar is just really from Paul then?
Yeah, it comes from Paul, yeah. He had a temper, he had a sense of humor. His sense of humor was great. His temper was very minor.
You're talking about Jesus.
Talking about Jesus, yeah. Talking about Jesus. He wasn't, he died because the people were mad at him for making sure that everybody understood that they were fools. That never goes down very well. That wasn't the point. That crucifixion had nothing to do with anything. Kelvin was crucified. I was crucified. We didn't do anything to help anybody else by doing that. We just hurt. It's just the way people treated people. We said the wrong thing to the wrong person, and they have their ability to get back at us. That's all. But
did you know you were going to be crucified
ahead of time?
Yeah.
No.
Did
No.
Jesus?
No, it all went wrong. And John the Baptist didn't know he'd get his head knocked off.
Did Jesus know a day or two or three before
yes,
that was likely going to happen? Yes, but that's not what you're asking, I think, Lorraine.
Yeah, this was not a soul plan. Nobody would have signed up for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, Kelvin's absolutely right. I mean, certainly Jesus knew by the time he went into Jerusalem, not that they were going to crucify him, but that he would get killed by the priests. He knew that was it. And he didn't think he wanted to he didn't think there was anything else left to say, but he wanted to demonstrate that he wasn't afraid of death.
And he never married.
He
never married.
He never married. No, but he talked to women. He was very good at breaking that rule. He broke lots and lots of rules. He broke all, I mean, you weren't supposed to talk to tax collectors. You weren't supposed to talk to, all kinds of people the priest wouldn't talk to. He talked to everybody.
Yeah, people don't realize the ancient Hebrew culture, the women, he wouldn't supposed to talk to women, never mind, women couldn't have group meetings. I mean, people don't realize, the people who write and supposedly channel about stuff about ancient times and with Jesus, you can see right through some of their stuff when they start talking about how powerful women were back then and all the amazing things that women around Jesus could do. I don't know if you want to talk about that, George, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's, the
patriarchy
was.
I feel like the earth just keeps repeating itself.
No, and
we
that's
just.
Yeah. We have the same personalities. That's why.
It's much better.
The same personalities. We keep doing slightly different things, but we keep looking for happiness in the same ways. But there are some big things that have shifted, and one of them is with women, and hasn't shifted everywhere on the planet because there's still a lot of the same patriarchal rules in place in a lot of places. But I think everybody realizes it's more enjoyable when everybody is not enslaved to slavery. The idea of slavery was just taken for granted until only 200 years ago. And it was all different forms of slavery. And again, that's the same thing. That is a greater respect for the free will of other minds. How we treat animals is shifting over time, and it's, again, you allow the animals to have their own free will to do what they want to. Now they're not going to be nice to us, the animals, most likely, unless they're cats and dogs and stuff. But in general, animals aren't nice to humans. But that doesn't matter. They should be able to live their own life. And I think that is a trend which has been up for a long time. I mean, I think I'm a big optimist about where human civilization is going. I have a much slower time frame than other people. But I've seen so many changes in the way that people think. I just give you an idea. 150 years ago, how many people had ever written a book, for example? Not read a book, written a book. Maybe 150,000, 200,000 people, something like that. Today, millions and millions of people are writing books. Now, are they all good books? No, but that doesn't matter. Just to write a book means that you're thinking more abstractly than you were before, that you have a totally abstract idea of what to do with life. No. And videos are not much different. You have an idea, what I want to present to the world, you put the whole thing together, and all that abstract thinking and everything, and all the logic that's required to create all of our technological machines and everything, it all creates a habit in people's minds of being more rational and being more respectful of other people. It's not an overwhelmingly wonderful society yet, but compared to what came before, it is.
The world's going to end. The world's going to end. I mean, now what I've seen just in my lifetime, the weather changes,
right.
It was April showers. Now we get the showers in May. Like everything's off.
Right. Everything's
off. If that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. We are definitely, things are changing. The climate is changing. The world, yes, the earth can come to an end if the sun explodes. If the sun explodes, the earth is gone. Boom, just like that. No question about it. Can we do something to make the earth become uninhabitable like Mars? Yes. But how much work would it take to do? It would take a lot of work and a lot of destruction. So far, what we're doing is much more like what we did in villages before. That is, we didn't keep it clean, and therefore there was a lot of disease. And all we had to do was clean a little village. We couldn't keep that village clean. Now we have so many people in big cities. We've learned about plumbing. Plumbing is a big difference. And there's all kinds of things like that. If we learn to keep it clean and how we use things, we'll be able to live here, and lots of people will be able to live here. It's cooperating and living together and doing it. The earth is not going to end most likely by something that human beings do. Human beings might wipe themselves out, but the cockroaches will survive. I know they will. No matter what we do, the cockroaches will. Even if we blow up 100,000 nuclear weapons or something like that, I would say the cockroaches will survive that. So I don't think we have the capacity to blow up the earth and make it come to an end. But that's not really the issue that we need to worry about. What we need to do is just every day make other people's experiences of life a little better in our life, and our lives will be a little bit better ourselves.
The reason I brought up that issue about women earlier, Lorraine, was the opposite of what I think you took from it. The reason I brought that up was to point out how things have positively changed over the last 2,000 years. It's incredibly positive. It's not where it should be, and we'd like it to be for women, et cetera, yet. But compared to 2,000 years ago, where women couldn't be talking to Jesus, he broke rules, where women could not convene and have a group meeting in that culture, Lorraine. Women are now running companies. This is an incredible improvement. Now, it's not where it should be. We know, we all that, blah, blah, blah. But look, and just in terms of what George is talking about plumbing, I've said this in my lectures, and you may have heard me say this, in the 1940s, it's not even 100 years ago, just 80 years ago, half of the households in the United States of America did not have indoor plumbing. You had to go outside to go to the bathroom. Half in the United States. This is a fact. This is not opinion. It's a known fact. Okay, 1940s. So things have improved. And so anyway, I just say this because people get a distorted opinion of the treatment of women. It needs to improve, but they think that it was better in the past and now it's worse. It's factually inaccurate. Okay.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when you get the history wrong, you don't know how to make progress, because you're working not with facts. But I think one big issue, maybe are there any other questions hanging around? No, because we're already 2 hours in.
Yeah.
All right. So one big issue that I want to just end with is what I call the imagination's horizon. Whatever we see and whatever we see around us, our imagination can do better than that. And we're always disappointed by, or not always, but we can be always disappointed by the distinction between what we experience and what our imagination says it should be. And the better you get, and the broader you get, and the bigger you think, your imagination is expanded, so your horizon is even further out. And the distinction between what you know can happen and what you see as the reality is even bigger. This is one of the causes of the leaders of the movement looking at the human race and saying, this is how you guys could be. Because they can see what the potential is. But we need to go from here to there. And my point is, when we arrive at the edge of the horizon that we have pointed out where we could go, then we'll be able to see a horizon even further on. The horizon will always recede, always be in the future, always be better. And therefore, that's a part of our life. We should get comfortable with the idea that we can always improve and just look at it as, oh, there's another way we can do things that will even be better. That'll be fun.
But then there's groups that try to put a stop to all that.
Yes.
Like, I don't know if Illuminati's real or not real, but stuff like that. Scientology. There's so many groups.
Well, I'll leave you with one comment that I make then. That is, the good thing about anarchy is that it's hard to get it organized.
True.
And so all the people working on trying to destroy things and create anarchy, they can create a little bit of it, but they can't organize the anarchy. Anarchy is unorganizable. They always fight with each other and so on. And the people who are cooperative and work with each other are usually trying to work to improve things, at least in their own minds. Now, they might have a theory that makes them do something that's a little bit off. But I think it's important to kind of think of all people with all their ideas for improvement as all part of team civilization. They have a different approach, but they're working towards it. And we shouldn't quibble about details as long as we're both in the same direction. But I wouldn't worry about the Illuminati. Yeah, don't worry about the Illuminati. When they're the people who people think are Illuminati and those kind of things, they can't work together very well anyway. Yeah,
Right.
the people who are positive towards the human race are the ones who can work together. So don't worry about
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks, George. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks, everybody.
Questions from everybody. Great questions from everybody. So
I hope that helps a little bit in your own pursuit of happiness. That's
Yes.
bottom line.
Thank you.
Yeah.
right. All right.
Thank you so much.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Take care, everybody.
Stokes, where did you know
everyone.
Mary from?